Gretel Fun. There it is. My name is Gretel. Thanks for joining before Labor Day weekend. I know it's a weird time of the year, especially with kids going back to school. So for today, we are very excited to be able to have this event. I think a lot of times we do our workshops, it always comes from the government side and what the government experiences and what they need, but it never truly comes from the people that actually go through the SBIR process. Before I make the introduction to our great speakers, a little bit of background. SBIR Connect is one of Connect's new program. It is a partnership with NIWC Pacific and NAV4, one of the Navy commands. And really what the program is about is just helping facilitate and educate in regards to SBIR and making collaborations between government, industry, and academia more accessible to you all. Now for Connect, we are a San Diego nonprofit aiming to help the innovation ecosystem here in San Diego through our various programs that help with mentorship of entrepreneurs and innovators, as well as raising capital by meeting with VC. So if you're interested in any of those programs, please check out our website, which is connect.org. So now for today, the subject is how to be super successful. And we have two great speakers that have gone through it from beginning to end with NAVWAR specifically. So we have Shadi Azum, who is a NAVWAR SBIR STTR program manager. He'll be doing a little bit of a overview as to what's going on with the new topics, specifically at NAVWAR. And then we have two, as I said, success stories. So we have Andy, who's a Bascom Hunter CEO, co-founder, and president. So a lot of hats going on there. And we also have Mark Abrams, who is the co-founder and CTO of the Harmonia Holdings Group. So we're very excited to have you both. They've done both phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 with NAVWAR, and that's what we call success. Success can be what we call phase 3, which is transition, and that can be into the government or into the commercial world. So I'm sure Shadi will touch a little bit more on that as well. So let's get started, and Shadi will take it away. We will hold the questions till the very end to do a Q&A with the speakers, but I'll make sure to keep an eye out for anything that you guys submit on the chat. So thank you, Shadi.
Yeah, thanks, Gretel. And thanks to our guest speakers today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I thought it'd be most appropriate that we did a little bit of a sidebar to talk about our two topics that are currently out on the streets right now on DoD SBIR STTR.mil. If you're ever interested in applying to one of the two topics that are there. So I created this simple guidance to the broad agency announcement just for everybody. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit and then introduce Andy and Mark to the group. So that being said, thank you, Gretel, for pulling up the slides. So if we go to the next slide, the brief the bullet points that I'll be sharing with everyone here on this webinar is really meant to provide some additional content or supplementary information to the broad agency announcement that we have released. This broad agency announcement holds all of our topics across the Department of Defense. Navy is one such entity that participates in the broad agency announcement and posts topics for SBIR for you guys to actually apply to. And then within the Navy, NAVWAR, where I represent, and where Gretel mentioned our partnership, we have submitted two topics in particular, which I'll talk about in the next couple slides. But this brief is not meant to replace the full instruction or the full broad agency announcement. I kind of think of a BAA as your Bible to how you are going to apply to one of our topics. So please don't just take my Cliff Notes version of it. Please take some time to review the broad agency announcement that's actually included here on the links that I provided on this slide. I think I covered everything on this slide, so we can go to the very next one. Okay, so the broad agency announcement, as I said before, is your guide if you ever want to submit towards any or more than one of the topics that are listed in Department of Defense SBIR ICTR cycle. It contains 8 sections. If you take a look at the PDF that the previous slide actually mentioned, it's actually a 268-page document don't be alarmed, because I think it's the first 90 pages, I think covers, sorry, not the 90 pages, I think the first like 40 pages covers the intro pieces, which is like what eligibility is, how to apply, where to apply, the formatting guidelines. The big bulk of the PDF document actually contains a list of topics. And those are the topics that describe our needs, as well as some of the other DoD sectors and their needs, and give you the context to determine whether or not what you've developed as a small business could apply to one of those topics. So as I mentioned before, Navwar has posted 2 topics to those. Sorry, go back one slide, Gretel. It's on page 92 specifically on the PDF, actually contains the Navy topics themselves, as well as what I would call a Navy annex. I would recommend like reviewing the BA in its entirety, and that's because you'll find that there in the general section, I think the first 40 pages, as I mentioned, are the general guidelines. When you look at the Navy Annex, which starts at page 92, you will see a little bit more detail about like what sections we care about, what sections we're not evaluating. This is a change that we've made in comparison to the previous broad agency announcements. For example, one of the things that you have to include as a small business is a company commercialization report. However, in the Navy Annex, you will see that if you apply to one of our Navy topics, we do not evaluate your company commercialization report. So we make that very crystal clear. So it's important to review not just the general BAA guidance, but also the Navy Annex portion if you are interested in applying to the Navy topics. Next slide, please. I got so hyped up on over the weekend about QR codes, so I thought I'd make a QR code to give you guys an exact link to where you can find the 2 Navwar topics. We are in a pre-release period. I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but the pre-release period is where you can contact the topic authors directly if you want to know a little bit more about the topic at hand. So we have listed those. There are emails in there. We didn't include phone numbers because we don't know how the telework situation is like nowadays. So we kept it as an email and enforced that our technical points of contacts can be reached by that. So you can always set up a follow-on phone call if need be. Next slide, please. The 2 topics that we have pushed out for the 21.3 cycle. If you are applying to one of those, it's in an effort to achieve the first phase of the SBIR phase award structure. So companies that do respond to our topics and are putting a proposal forth are competing for what is known as a phase 1 award. That's the entry-level award to the SBIR life cycle. So do kind of keep that in mind. You're not getting the full amount across the SBIR life cycle. We go in a gated phase system. We do have a specific video on the connect.org/SBIR website, which we highly recommend you to a little bit know more about this phase structure if you've never participated in SBIR before, but I will leave it at that for simplicity. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think the next couple of slides that I have here just kind of break down or extract certain sections to be well aware of. There's sections that I think companies don't kind of extract. So that being said, if you want to know about whether or not you're eligible to compete in SBIR, there's a chock full of information that is out there, especially on the connect.org website. But on the BAA, it's also reinforced on page 11. So if you want to check that out, or if you're questioning whether or not you're a new small business and can apply, that's a place to go to. Next slide, please. These are some little elements that I think companies don't kind of keep in mind. So there are, again, 8 sections that I kind of talked about in the general BAA. In section 4, talks a little bit of, I would call the proposal fundamentals. So if you are a small business applying, be aware that for phase 1, you must do at least 2/3 of the work. And for phase 2, you must do at least half the work. Every small business has what is known as a principal investigator, the main lead or project manager, if you will. That must be primarily employed by the small business, which is the second bullet here. The work must be performed in the United States. And specifically for the Navy, it does talk about debriefs in the general BAA on section 4.10, but in the Navy, we actually put a time limit. So we actually say that if you do get a selection or non-selection notice after your proposal has been evaluated, you have 15 days to submit for what is known as a debrief. I can say that's everything, all the comments from our evaluators stripped away from their names. That gives a idea of what was the evaluation like. So we're pretty transparent about our evaluation comments, minus who actually evaluated them. So if you take a look further, you will see, and I think I have a slide on this about what we evaluate on. Also really important is probably the very last bullet on the slide, which is the email that if you have trouble with the portal to submit your proposal, please send an email out to that link that you see here. I do not have administrator access, nor does the TPOC, so please make sure if you do have issues, A, you submit it as soon as possible, and then B, that's the correct email address should you have any problems with the portal itself. Next slide, please. This is the timeline of events. If you wish to participate in one of our topics or submit a proposal to one of our topics, right now, as I kind of mentioned, we're in a pre-release period. The pre-release period allows you to directly contact a technical point of contact, basically the person who authored the topic that we have written, if you'd like to gain a little bit more clarification on the topic. That's a very important thing and probably my biggest tip to any small business that is interested in any of our topics. We make it a very big point for our TPOCs to be available to answer any questions. They can't answer any questions like how many awards we'll be giving or anything programmatic. That's a question reserved for myself. But if you ever want to learn more about the topic at hand, that's a perfect time to do so in a very intimate fashion. Once the 21st of September hits, which is the open period for the broad agency announcement, that's where you cannot have any direct contact with our topic authors. So it's really important to capitalize on the pre-release period as much as possible. A, to kind of gain a little bit more information to help infuse that into your proposal. And then B, it's a good, it's a good kind of like balance checker to see whether or not your solution meets that topic. We always think that a proposal is an investment of your time. So it's good to get those answers as soon as possible before you invest anything further in developing a proposal. The last day to submit proposals is the 21st of October. That's at 12 Eastern time. Do not wait to the very last minute. We have seen an influx of issues happen during the very last day. So try to get your proposal as soon as possible. The last 2 days on this timeline basically give you an idea of when you will hear from us next. No later than 90 days after October 21st, which I couldn't do math, so I put an increment of time, but no later than 90 days, we will give you a notice, official notice by email, whether or not you've been selected and whether or not you can request a debrief. And this is specifically to select or non-select on a phase one. Then within 180 days of the close date of October 21st, those firms that have been selected for an award, for a phase one award, will have their awards made no later than 180 days after the close date. So that kind of gives you a timeline should you ever want it for any planning purposes. Next slide, please. Okay, for anyone that's interested in how we evaluate each and every one of our proposals, these are the different criteria that we evaluated on. So the soundness, technical merit of your actual proposed solution to one of our topics, that's a big one. Your qualifications of the team makeup, and then finally your ability to commercialize. Remember that SBIR is a program that not only helps address government needs, but also has a dual purpose nature to it. So we want to be able to get an idea of how you're able to commercialize your solution. Those three are well in depth when you take a look at the BAA. So I'm basically providing you guys a teaser to the actual BAA for you guys to read at your leisure or during this time. Next slide, please. Okay, I think it's my very last slide, which covers some of the tips before I introduce our guest speakers. So do not wait to the very last day to submit your proposal. Again, that's really important on a technology front. I don't think we accommodate the bandwidth with it. So, you do have that allotted time, but be aware of any potential issues down the road. Read the submission requirements. It is a large PDF, but it is well worth your time to read through those just to make sure that your proposal isn't rejected for example, for the font size, which we push on there. And then very last thing, and this is something that you would actually utilize during your pre-release period, is to familiarize yourself with the government program that pushed the topic to begin with. So the technical points of context in every one of our topics, they represent our program offices. So they know exactly if you were to craft a solution in response to our topics, where that solution will be inserted into the program. So it's really a great opportunity for you during the pre-release period, if you are interested and you think that what you can develop is applicable to the topic, it's really important to ask questions to the technical point of contact to get more information about that program and what it does. And that will, I think, help fuel you in your proposal, but also if you do get an award on your transition planning and to make sure that it's in alignment with what the program wants. So leave it at that. And I think that being said, I think, Gretel, this is my last slide. So I want to first thank our guest speakers. So we wanted to have a little bit of a different take on our government workshop that we host every month. And we wanted to hear from industry side of how they've been able to utilize the SBIR program and what tips they have and successes or maybe pitfalls, which I wouldn't fault if you guys have any specific comments to our guest speakers about if there's anything within the government that, you found as a weakness or something we can improve on, but it just gives a real honest, transparent look on the industry side, how they use the program. So that being said, I will push it to Gretel to introduce or further introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Shadi. Once again, we're super excited and thankful that the speakers could give their time today to hopefully motivate you, and hopefully it's all positive as to what the SBIR process does to not just for the government, but also for small businesses. So for our first speaker, we have Bascom Hunter, CEO, president, and co-founder. We have Andy here. We're very thankful to have him. So Andy, if you could please introduce yourself and just take it away. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. For all the participants, if you have any questions during any of our speakers' presentations, just post them on the Q&A little chat box, and we'll make sure to get those answered either as the presentation goes or at the very last part of our event. So thank you, and go ahead, Andy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to see if I can share this screen too. Okay, share. Is the screen showing correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Gretel and Shadi, for inviting me to participate in the this meeting today. I'm a big fan of the SBIR program. I think it's a great program that really allows parts of the country and underserved regions of the country to participate in tech development that aren't necessarily linked to large amounts of venture capital. So any place no matter where you're located, if you're a small business, you can apply to the program, and they judge you based on the merit of your proposal. So it's a great program, but there are some parts of it that you should know going in, and I'll touch on these themes, throughout the presentation. But it's a long process. You should know that it's a long process, and you should plan accordingly. You need to make sure you have good partnerships, because as a small business, especially one that's just getting into the program, you're not going to be able to provide everything that's needed to go and solve these complex government problems that are trying to be addressed. And so you need to know that you need partnerships, and they need to be enduring partnerships that you can work with, over the duration of the program. And lastly, you should know that the SBIR program is not going to pay for everything that is needed to get to a commercialization phase. So you will need additional resources throughout the process, as I'll talk about. But just wanted to lay that out. But I've been involved with, I'm currently the president of Bascom Hunter, which is a spin-out company from Princeton University. We're located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We have about 35 employees. When we started the company, we had licensed some intellectual property that was developed at Princeton, and we've used the SBIR process to help develop that technology. We now have two main business lines. One's related to SATCOM systems, another one related to thermal management products. And we're AS 9100 certified and ISO certified. So the project that we were working on, we started back in 2011. It's dealing with challenging RF environments. You know, when we have forward deployed assets, we have problems with interference that can cause disruptions of your communication links. And so there's also another need for greater bandwidth in these, assets. And so it's also very difficult to deploy and integrate new modems and new technologies with a long cycle. And so our project that we were funded to do was to help address some of these issues. Sorry, I'm having some issues with scrolling forward. And we've included in our program a number of partners to help address some of these problems. As I mentioned earlier, I think partnerships are a key component of being successful in commercialization and getting from a phase 1 to a phase 3. In our particular case, our phase 3 was with the government. There are obviously cases where people sell products that are developed in the SBIR program to the commercial sector or prime contractors in this particular case. And we've done that as well in some other programs, but in this case, we're working directly for the government as part of a phase 3 contract. And we have a pretty broad group of partners that we work with very closely. A lot of these we've been working with for 10 years plus, in the program. And so I do think that's an important part of what's required to be successful. So the SPIN program, which is what was the result of this initial SBIR activity, was to create the capability to integrate and verify new SATCOM technologies. I have a timeline that shows some of how we started with the project and how it evolved over time. But what we're doing is helping to test and evaluate solutions to emerging problems that the DoD and the Navy have. And we help verify, certify that these technologies work together as intended when they're deployed. And we're trying to reduce the time to deployment as part of this overall effort. And as I mentioned, we started this project back in 2011. And so this is our timeline of the program. And you can see, we've moved into phase 3. And the first phase 3 contract came in 2019, but you can see that was an 8-year, effort. We started out with developing some core technology related to interference mitigation. So you can think of it as a little widget that was going to plug in to solve some specific interference problems. As part of that effort, we had to create a lot of interfaces. It's a complex problem, and there's a lot of different components that end up making up a total solution. And so as we started integrating the cancellation system into the overall system, the integration piece of it became a bigger and bigger piece of what we're doing for the government. But we went through a phase 1. We got the phase 1 option, and those phase 1s and phase 1 options are typically 6-month programs. We got the phase 2. We got the phase 2 option, and you can see there's a little gaps, occasionally, in between these programs. Got into a phase 2.5, and then we hit the valley of death. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a long process, and you need additional financial resources. But when you hit that valley of death, it's a real thing. You need to, understand that the government procurement process, and actually the government has gotten a lot better at how they've transitioned technologies. And there's a lot of initiatives to try to speed things along. But the reality is there's always going to be a little bit of gap, especially if you're talking about a single project. And so in our particular case, we had some investment that we made in order to help bridge that gap. We bootstrapped our way through it. we had a few other programs that also helped, bridge the gap where we could keep our engineers that were working on this deployed on other programs. And so it was, some effort, but we knew that that was sort of part of the process. And so as painful as it is to sort of have these kind of gaps, it's something that if you plan for, you can sort of mitigate the fallout. And then in 2019, we got our phase 3 contract. And again, we got another one earlier this year where we're continuing to, build upon the work. But, the main points, here are, it is a long process. You do have to stay engaged for a long period of time. You do have to, work with your customer to understand their requirements, because when you first start out, trying to solve that problem that is in that phase 1 solicitation, that's only one piece of the problem typically, and the whole solution usually involves other parts of it, and you really have to understand those other parts, and make sure that your solution is actually addressing things that are going to be compatible with the other parts of the overall solution. So as I mentioned, some of the keys to success is to plan on a long process. I mean, you obviously want to do everything you can to expedite the process. However, there are limits to what you can do, and so sometimes you find yourself pushing on a rope, and so you do have to know that there's that things don't always move as fast as you want. I think personally, having partnerships is a key component of being successful. Working with large companies, working with other small companies, working with universities, I think is important. And so I'm a big proponent of partnerships. I think you need to also plan to have, to need additional financial resources, and those can come in different forms. They could be, if you have a business, you could, maybe tap into the other revenue streams you have to sort of bridge some of the gaps or some of the other things that aren't funded, through the SBIR project. But you should know that the SBIR program isn't going to pay for everything. So you are going to need other investments are going to be required more than likely. That valley of death is a very real thing. It's very painful and frustrating. But if you can get to the other side, it is very rewarding, and it is possible. So you should know. So those are my sort of quick remarks on the SBIR program, and I think we'll have Q&A later if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have some questions regarding the process. So if that's all for Andy, I think we'll go ahead and move to the next speaker. Once again, Andy, thank you so much. Oh, and I'll start my video to make sure you see me. So for our next speaker, we have someone that has gone through it as well. So we have the Harmonia Holdings Group, and Mark Abrams is going to go ahead and do that presentation for us. And then just a quick reminder, if you've been in our events in the past, we did 2 NAVWAR PMW highlights. And if you remember McLeana and Nick Geezy, when they talked about their capability gaps, they're actually the TPOCs for our 2 speakers today. So you can go back and watch those if you're interested to see how they kind of work together and how that all began. So with that said, Mark, thank you so much for joining us, and please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Greta. And thanks also, Shadi, for the opportunity to talk today, and the great experience that we've had in the SBIR program, and also with NAVWAR in particular, and with Nick Geezy and others. So I'm the CTO and co-founder at Harmonia, and have served as the principal investigator in many of our SBIR projects. And I also have attending here as well, who may help in the Q&A, our CEO and co-founder, Paulo B. Sabu. We'll go ahead and share our slides. Okay.
It looks great. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, good. So I want to describe the path, so that to contrast a little bit with Andy's talk, I want to describe the sort of life cycle or whole path of Harmonia as a company that we took from our first entry into the SBIR program until building the broad business that we have today. And we'll go over a lot of the successes that we've had, But I think the value for everyone listening is to look at this as an example of how an inspiration of what an important program the SBIR program is, and how it enabled us, especially with NAVWAR, to leverage SBIRs and create a successful and growing company. So Harmonious started out actually trying to build a commercial product before SBIR involvement to improve human-computer engineering and human-computer aided decision-making, and hence the Harmonia name, creating harmony between people and computers. And today we've grown into a company with about 400 employees and a 90% over that retention rate, because we found a lot of people that are attracted to our company culture, and also the idea of having the opportunity to do innovation and solutions that the SBIR program provides, and are looking for a long-term home. So in terms of building the business, we really pursue two strategies and continue with those in parallel today in the two gray boxes. In the box on the left, we started in 2014 with just a single SBIR with NAVAIR and the Tomahawk program. And coincidentally for us, the Tomahawk program wanted to simplify the design of user interfaces to conduct strikes. And so they put out an SBIR topic very much like the technology we were developing at the time. So it really propelled us into the SBIR program. And today we've done about 100 phase 1 and phase 2 SBIR contracts, and then received recognition with that with the Tibbetts Award that I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I also want to credit the success we've had to some incredibly dedicated Navy folks who really work tirelessly to support the SBIR programs. And when we got started, they put in a lot of hours and believed in our technology approach, and they went to bat for us in NAVAIR to help advance us to phase 2, and also a critical step of putting a phase 3 IDIQ contract in place. And you need the phase 3 vehicle to cross what Andy referred to very aptly as the valley of death when the phase 2 funding ran out. The other thing I think that was an important ingredient is, while I, as the CTO and principal investigator, focused on making our SBIR technology work, our CEO, Pallavi Sabu, worked in parallel from the time that the phase 1 topic came out through the phase 2 and investigation of what the transition path is with the program, to map that path out with our government points of contact, and to build stakeholder relationships too. And that's really led to our 95% commercialization index. But it's not all roses. We certainly learned in the Navy that the leadership officers in the PMW transition, into other roles. And so the phase 1, 2, 3 sequence takes so many years that when new leadership comes in, it brings different priorities. And another lesson has been that it takes constancy and purpose to see your innovations at phase 3, and looking to where there may be other customers within the Navy or otherwise within DoD that could use those topics. And then the gray box on the right, then, when we got to 2009, we had an inflection point where we started a dual strategy of pursuing regular service contracts. First in the Navy portal oceanographic, and then expanding to dozens of other DoD and civilian agencies. So part of this was to help us find a way to balance out our revenue stream, because like was referred to previously by Andy, they get starts and stops in the program. So it helped us create a very stable company and give us a diversified contract base. And that's really fueled our growth over more than a decade. As a quick illustration of the variety of SBIR work we show here a thumbnail of 2 projects, and these are both NAVWAR SBIR topics that went to phase 3 contracts. And on the left, we've been fortunate to support continuously since 2008 originally in SBIRs, and then in phase 3 contracts from PMW 150 and NAVAIR, decision aids for command and control. And this is where Nick Giese has been our TPOC. We've been fortunate to have that stability of the same TPOC for many years in that. And this problem is concerned with really, making decisions in a problem space that's bigger than what humans can keep in their mind, especially during tactical situations. And so we are looking at large-scale problems of how to map missions to the assets that are used to support them. We looked at a variety of technologies for this, and I'll say a little more about that subsequently. A key part of that has really been to support the whole path to having these go to trials at sea. And so we have these as part of a portfolio of several technologies that we've developed that have gone to Trident Warrior and RIMPAC and been tested on the Carl Vinson. The other thing that I list on the right was another technology that was originally developed for NAV-WAR and what used to be the software radio or jitters program to automate the orchestration of various analysis tools for software to collect evidence of fitness for use. And we developed a technology called Conforma, and it compares analysis tools for areas such as cybersecurity vulnerabilities to help identify false positives or negatives by comparing different tools that are out there instead of relying on a single source of truth. And so this transitioned to phase 3 funding at DISA for the problem of vetting applications for cyber vulnerabilities before they were approved for use on DoD cell phones. And the graph illustrates how Conforma reduced the time to orchestrate a whole variety of static and dynamic code and network analysis tools and put the information together to generate reports for the risk management executive with an 80% cost savings. So this gives you an illustration of a couple of the projects that we've done with NAV-WAR. Then here was the next stage. We really expanded outside of the SBIR program. And in this, I illustrate 4 different examples that are here. The first one picks up with the asset pairing tool from PMW 220, where we looked at different ways of building decision aids, starting with artificial intelligence that required a lot of domain knowledge from experts, and then moving to machine learning, which didn't require that and could be trained, and more recently to optimization. And that illustrates one of the other key things we've learned, which is it's important also to find partnerships with universities, and wound up working with Duke University for their statistics department for a lot of expertise on the optimization. So we didn't spend time building things that we didn't know whether they work or not. And then some of the other things we've done with ONR for enemy course of action analysis, and then other agencies as well, like the Army, to be able to build a tool for soldiers to build mobile applications, part of our original human-computer interface focus. In terms of the Tibbetts Award that I mentioned earlier, we received it 3 times, and I think all 3 of these cases are interesting ones to consider. The most recently was with DARPA for a technology to develop platform-independent blockchain applications, and that was used in DTIC for DTIC blockchain for chain of custody for documentation within DoD. And so previously, in 2013, we received the Tibbetts for a cashless payment for littoral combat ships. In that case, the government was the actual phase 3 contractor or awardee or awarder of a contract. And that actually went to phase 3 while we were still in phase 1 because the littoral combat ships didn't have anything to accommodate for cash. And we had a solution in phase 1, and in a year, we designed and engineered it and built it and put it through cybersecurity, which was a long part of the process, installed hardware on the first littoral combat ship and had it ready for its initial voyage. And then the final one is in 2007 for our original human computer engineering work. Great illustration. It started in the Tomahawk program, but it wound up being used, and it was phase 3 transition to a large system integrator who used it to design about 600 or 700 user interfaces for the Zumwalt destroyer. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so now we were able to grow from that into a very large number of contracts in combination of SBIR and also the contracts that we did in our services work. And the graph here illustrates that, and really have impacted a lot of users worldwide that use that aggregate number of systems as well. So it illustrates, once you kind of get the ball rolling and you've got a mixed revenue stream, how you're able to leverage that and grow that into a pretty significant contract base. The other thing which we had to learn how to do is there's a great variety of SBIR topics that come out. since we did a lot of things that involved software, AI, ML, data management, and so on. The question is, how do you manage and what do you choose to pursue? So we matured ourselves into 4 different pillar areas. So that's how we organized ourselves with people in different areas here, knowledge, understanding on the left, which our decision aids fall into, and more digital transformation and infrastructure in the second tier, mobile devices and usability design in the third tier. And then cybersecurity. Why cybersecurity? Well, everything that we do for DoD requires cybersecurity, and even getting these applications I mentioned onto a ship for sea trials requires going through a cybersecurity process. Then one other lesson from our path is that we started, doing SBIRs, and then we brought on business development resources, and then they told us right away that we needed to get some contract vehicles in, or we wouldn't really be able to win follow-on work or win services work to apply those contracts. And we didn't have any set-aside categories like 8A to make it easier to learn to win contracts. So we were just small and can compete in that category. So we systematically applied for and won many vehicles as illustrated here. And we pursued a strong strategy of partnering with other companies to use these vehicles and foster partnerships. So we are always happy to talk with anyone. If you have a client but don't have the vehicle that we can that you can use, and in that case we have a match and can help and partner on that. So that concludes Harmonia's story of what can be achieved in the SBIR program, and especially with the Navy and NAVWAR's SBIR programs. Thanks, Greta.
Thank you so much, Mark. Once again, thank you for our speakers, both great presentations. Also very happy with your honesty. I'm sure a lot of the questions actually have come up with some of the things that you have mentioned. So I think the best way to move forward is maybe ask the questions that were asked first for each presenter. So I'm actually going to start off with Mr. Shadi Azum. So the first question that came through is something that I think you can answer, which is what's the best way to communicate with SBIR, STTR funding sources prior and during the application process?
Yeah, so I kind of equate the funding sources being like the program managers for SBIR. So that would be like myself for NAVWAR, or my sort of sister program managers at the others. At the other Navy commands. There's a point of contact, and I can include it in the link in the Zoom chat to contact myself or my counterparts. That's the best way to kind of get a hold of them, is via email and reaching out that way.
Thank you, Shadi. And then another one that we got a couple of times, and I think these are people that are thankfully submitting their proposals right now, but once you submit your proposal, how are they going to be notified, and what's the timeline looking like?
Yeah, so timeline would be 90 days after the close date, no later than. I try to make it as soon as I can, or as soon to have an internal robust schedule for evaluations, but it is no later. We have a deadline that's no later than 90 days past the close date. Which was October 21st for this particular cycle. We do have an internal system that we use to evaluate and submit and finalize our selection notices. The address would be something at navysbirprogram.com. So I can also include that in the chat, because we've actually seen just a few rare cases where it's been selection notices have been shifted into the spam folder. So if you don't hear from us, do check your spam folder just in case, or you're more than welcome to reach out to myself if you submitted to a NAVWAR topic, or any of the other Navy points of contact that are listed, which I will also put on this chat window right here.
Thank you, Shadi. And then this next question came for Andy, who's actually answering in the chat right now. But I did want Shadi, I did want Shadi to touch on that part about the written. So the question says, for Andy, did you pursue a SBIR as an initial revenue stream? Was the SBIR written for you, or do you apply it to something that looks similar to what you were already working on? So I want Shadi to touch on the written for you part as an SBIR program manager, and then Andy, please go ahead after Shadi.
Okay. Oh wait. So now I'm unmuted. Wait a minute. So I'm trying to think of the question. Do you mind repeating the question? I'm sorry. This is me trying to multitask, which is really a bad idea.
You're good. So the question is, was Andy's SBIR written for him? So I kind of want to clarify why the answer is no.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And so we make it a point for every one of our topics to be fair. That's the premise behind SBIR, is not to show any favoritism to when we do release a topic. So all of our topics, while we might be inspired by what industry has out there, we do not have we don't have topics written exclusively for a small business to make sure it's an open and fair competition. So that's the tidbit I will leave on that. And thank you, Andy, for reinforcing that.
Yeah, so in our particular case, so the question, just to repeat, I think what the question was, did we start out looking at the SBIR as a primary source of revenue? And the answer is yes. In this particular case, we were starting a spin out of Princeton University. So it was university technology, and we were interested in trying to commercialize it. I was located in Louisiana, where there's not a lot of venture capital that's available. And so we did look at the SBIR program as a source to pay for the development of that technology. And so we started out trying to get the technology developed using the SBIR program. We had the technology, and so what we did is to, identify topics that were published that were asking for a solution that our technology could solve. And so it was very much like Shadi mentioned. They're just broadcasting that they need a certain solution. Anybody can apply. It's a very competitive process. And so I think actually our first topic, we did not win. Our first proposal, we didn't win, but we stuck with it and eventually did find a topic where our solution was the ideal fit, and have been, active in the program ever since.
Thank you, Andy. There was another question that was written during your presentation, but I think this is something that you and Mark can both answer, which you mentioned partnerships being valuable and necessary. So the question goes, did you have those partnerships in place or in mind when you first applied for your phase one? And I'll let whoever wants to speak first go ahead and take that.
I can go ahead and answer. For us, we always try to figure out the partnership when we see the topic. What makes sense at that point? What do we need to be a complete team for that too? And that partnership, I think, is really essential to write a strong enough proposal, because the competition is so keen on that. There are times when you work on the work later and you're through phase 2 and maybe getting into phase 3, again, where we found that you need a partner, but really we do it up front.
Yeah, so similarly, we obviously have people that we've worked with, and have a relationship with, that may be the people we go to first for a particular capability, but we're generally responding to a topic that's out there, and we look at, okay, we have a particular capability, the solution requires more than what we can offer, so let's go partner with somebody who can offer that other part of the solution, so that we have a total solution. We don't try to build it all here. We try to have, good relationships, and it's tough to do it all. And generally, it's not even desired by the customer to have, just one person. They like to have partnerships, so they're getting the best from the, what's available in the market. And so we do generally develop the partnerships in response to a particular solicitation.
Great, thank you both. And I'm gonna add on to that question 2 more questions. The first one being, anything you would have done differently to manage the value of death issue? And then additionally, what did you wish you knew along the way, and what did you overlook in hindsight?
So
if you don't mind, I can take that question. Oh, Andy, were you saying something?
Yeah, I have a response, and so I can go first or later, but
go first, please.
So Bascom Hunter is actually my second company for that I started as a university spin out that used the SBIR program to develop technology, and in both cases they were very successful. But in the first particular case, I didn't understand the Valley of Death and the timeline, and so we did things where we were, too aggressive in trying to develop the technology, assuming that the contract was going to be there when we wanted it to be there, and the technology was going to be ready when we wanted it to be ready. And so when I started Bascom Hunter, it was not as painful because we just planned for it. And so I think you can minimize a lot of your problems by just knowing that you shouldn't be hiring those 20 engineers or even 2 engineers that you don't have the contract for, and you need to rely on partnerships that you can wind up and down as needed. And so just planning for the sort of ups and downs that are part of it, especially if you're just starting and you're small and you don't have a lot of inertia, you have to be very judicious in how many resources you throw at a problem, because you're going to have these gaps, and you're not going to have a continuous funding stream, and it's not going to be this nice linear path. And so I sort of incorporated my main lesson from my first company and my second company, and it was much more, much less painful.
Andy's right. Let me take we've done 90 plus SBIR contracts. If I add phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and there was a maturity and a lessons learned that came to mind, which I'll sum up because it covers the Valley of Death, it covers teaming. So I remember very early on, a large company had called us and said, okay, take us on a team and give us 10% of your work. And I was like, I have done phase 1, I'm going to win phase 2. Why would I give you 10% of my work? That was ignorance, because a lot of these larger primes really bring the support and the transition knowledge that is needed to actually take it to phase 3. So that maturity came along the way. Teaming really starts when you are working in phase 1, because you really know what the moving parts are, what the problem solution is, where the potential transitions are. So we became smarter and started teaming, even though we'd won the phase 1 probably on our own. And we realized the Valley of Death that Andy pointed out early on, because the first few SBIRs just went dud. And we realized the way to overcome that Valley of Death, because a lot of us who do SBIR monies don't come from money, right? When we do SBIR grants, we need that money to build our technology. And we realized that no technology can be made with a $750,000 investment or even a 1.5 million. So right after we'd won a phase 1, we'd go look for similar topics which would help amplify and run during the period of the Valley of Death. So we created a stream of non-stop funding, and many SBIRs contributing to one technology and different aspects of a technology, and a large prime in the mix that would help us then take it to completion. And I think if we have all 3 legs in place and put our ego to the sides a little bit, because I certainly had a lot of, we made it, why should we share? You can create a path of success. It is the easiest path of success because you don't have a VC or a private equity in the mix. So whatever you make of your business is all yours, and the decisions are yours, and the passion is yours. So I think for Harmonia, those 3 legs of teaming, parallel SBIRs, and having the transition goal always in mind and not just an S&T project in mind, got us so far. Back to you, Greta.
Thank you so much. And for our attendees, I don't think we actually introduced you. So that was Harmonia's CEO, everybody. So thank you for joining. The next question, I think it's actually a really good question that we get all the time. And given that Shadi and I are more on the government side, we tend to not be able to answer this as well as we should. There's 2 questions actually, but the first one is, of the topics you were both awarded, did you have any previous familiarity or groundwork with the government's efforts that sponsor the topic, or were these new opportunities from groups you had no previous knowledge of?
I can speak for Harmonia. Generally, we don't have any knowledge. There's such a vast array of SBIR topics that are out there. I mean, we look through the rounds and see what matches where we've got the expertise in, and then try to learn a little bit about the programs from what's available. but it is very hard. You don't know. You can talk to the authors and get maybe a little information, but you don't know in the end. So that really hasn't, there isn't really any way to get familiar with it other than doing some research. Of course, if you worked in a certain area like SBIR with multiple contracts, you can generally tell what's going on with that too, and that helps. The one thing I think did help me, at least when I started, is I actually, because I was a university professor before, I was actually on an SBIR evaluation panel for the National Science Foundation. And we went into a room and we were handed a pile of proposals, and we all had to stay there during the whole time and read them and review them and make a recommendation. And the one thing I learned is, man, you better be able to write incredibly clearly with it, because it was very hard to figure out in a lot of those proposals what they were actually trying to propose to do. So I think the quality of writing is important. The team, for myself and Polyby, always worked really well because I could write technically what it was, and Polyby had the benefit of being very logical and thinking about it, but not knowing the technology, and in a way being very helpful to look at it and say, okay, this makes sense. Or look, you made a conclusion here and I don't see where it's coming from with it. So I think the writing quality is something to really focus on and to do it yourselves.
To add to what Mark said, you don't necessarily know what the topic's going to be, but it's such a competitive program that if you don't have some work, some foundational work that you're starting from when you write your proposal, you're not going to be competitive. You do have to have, some key technology that has, been matured to a very well-developed concept with sound analysis of why it's good. The program is merit-based, and so you're competing with people that are going to be proposing things that are have had some fundamental research done. Even if they don't know what the topic is, they'll take some other experience that's related and apply it to the topic at hand. So that's why partnerships for those that are just getting started, being able to work with the universities like the first one that I would recommend you go to. The other thing I would recommend is, if you look at, I assume this is, for people sort of that are just interested in SBIR topics in general, but I recommend that people that are just starting out look at NSF. They really like to fund people that never got an SBIR award. They like, funding, people that have done some work that is, tied to a university. So if they can find a university partner, that's not a bad place to start as you look for the right DoD. The DoD is a much bigger budget. They're much more mission oriented. There's a lot more opportunities in the DoD. NSF is a good place if people are just getting into it to look for an entry point. And don't expect, if you've never done it before, to get accepted the first time out. A lot of the times you will get feedback, and you should, take that feedback to heart, continue to work on it, and develop your solution. It's a good program. It's hard to get into without, very strong technical merit. And so you do have to have that to be successful, I believe.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that's a really good point to bring out. Obviously, Shadi and I are a little bit more tied to the Navy and the DoD, but SBIR is across 11 federal agencies. So it's important to note that your technology might not be a good fit for the Navy, or you might not find the right topic within the Navy, but there's other agencies that develop their own SBIRs. And they all have a little bit of a different process as well. So it's always good to check on that. But in relation to what you both have been saying, and I think, Mark, you kind of already answered this question, but a question that we get every single workshop is, did you write your own SBIR proposal, or did you have a consultant write it for you or with you? And we'll leave that as the last question, given that we only have 2 minutes, but whoever wants to answer, please go ahead.
For our money, 100% we write ourselves. We never had anyone write an outside one.
Yeah, we write all of our proposals. However, we do find it valuable to get a outside consultant to review as a red team review. And so we do use consultants, and there's a number of them out there, but you should expect them only to be giving you, this is not clear. Can you explain this better? That kind of advice. You really got to know what you're doing, but we do find it's good to get it's very competitive. You should know that. And so if you haven't had a lot of experience, you should be looking for some, coach. We use Jim Greenwood who's very good. I think there's another one that are out there, but you can find them. But there's some. It's worth the few $1,000s they may charge, or even 500, I think, in some cases for phase one.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, we're right at the time, but I do want to know, as both of our speakers mentioned, it is a competitive program. We also understand how much effort and time and money goes into the proposal. So it's always good to do your research, to take advantage of the pre-release period, to ask those questions, to make sure that you are a good fit for that topic, so that all of your time is not wasted. But with that, I want to thank the speakers for your time, for sharing your experience and your knowledge of the SBIR program, but more than what Shadi and I could have done, given that we're on the other side. So thank you both for your time. Actually, the three of you, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And we're very lucky to have you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.